Margin and padding are both really important CSS properties to understand. They both are basically a way of creating space. If we look at this diagram here, imagine this was one of our products. We would probably want it to appear something like this, with a little bit of spacing around it. In reality though, this is how it would appear by default, placed in the top corner with no spacing. We see this in action in our current project, where the product default is the top left of the available space. To fix this, we can apply margin to the outside of an element to create some spacing. Margin can be applied to be the same on each side, or we can add a different amount on each side if required. The same thing happens when we add elements inside of this product div. The element, such as this image, or even any text, is placed in the top corner. Just like before, we may not want the image to be tight to the top corner. For this situation, we have what is called padding. Padding also adds spacing, but this time inside of the element. So margin is outside of the element and padding is applied to the inside of the element. The darker green border highlights what the padding actually does. It acts as a cushion, keeping things away from the sides. We can also set this equally on all sides, or have different values on each side. As we see here, both margin and padding can both be set for each side individually by setting top, right, bottom, and left values. Thankfully, there are some shorthand versions too. Taking a look at these two examples on the left, we can set margin or padding with 4 values. These 4 values are clockwise, beginning at the top, so top, right, bottom, and then left. Here we have both the top and bottom values set to 10 pixels. Then the left and right values the same too at 5 pixels. For this case, we can also shorten this even further, as we see on the right hand side. The first value is the top and bottom, and the second is for the left and right. We have already seen this in our project when we centered our website using margin 0 auto. 0 tells the browser to add no margin to the top and bottom of the body section. Then the additional space on the left and right can be divided up equally, leaving the body section centered on the page. So enough of this theory, let's give this a go inside of our project. Starting with the margin, if we go over to the styles.css and up to the product, we can add some margin to this product section of 5 pixels. Because we've only added one value, this will apply to all sides of the product. Let's see this with a reload. And now we can see 5 pixels of space, and this is appearing around all sides of the product. Then go ahead and add some padding too. Also of 5 pixels, and then refresh. And now we have a 5 pixel cushion on the inside of the div. Also, another important thing to note is that browsers often apply default values of margin and padding too. This means sometimes we may want to reset the values back to 0. An unordered list is a common one, which this often applies to. So let's go over to the CSS and we can reset these values. If we go just below the header and footer, let's target the UL, and then we can set the margin back to be 0. And if we watch out for this, when we refresh, we're seeing everything move up as the default margin was removed. We can also do the same too to remove any default padding. Again, back over to the unordered list, and then we can reset the padding back to 0. And if we keep a close eye out for when we refresh, we see all the unordered lists are now moved over to the left hand side. This is something to bear in mind if you're wondering why something looks a little different than expected, due to the browser adding some default values. Also, just to make things even more confusing, different browsers often have different values too. There are, however, a few resources to help us with browser defaults. If we go over to Google and then do a search for CSS reset, and the top one we want is Maya Web, so click on this. This is a style sheet. If we scroll down, we can see the code just here. We can use this inside of our project to effectively remove any default styling provided by browsers. This then gives us a blank canvas to start with. Alternatively, we can use another CSS file called normalize. So again, let's do a Google search for CSS normalize. And this top link is the one we need, so click on this. Normalize works slightly differently to reset. Rather than remove any browser defaults, it provides styles to make our website display more consistently across a range of browsers. This is just a side note, however, and something you may find useful. To include this into our project, all we need to do is to download the file and add it to our project, just like we have done with our own custom style sheet. So this is it now for margin and padding, and next we're going to dive into using different display types.